It's the Osceola's Seminole Sidelines. For more on the Seminoles, including Osceola's coverage from veteran Seminole insiders, message boards, Osceola virtual happy hours, and more, go to theosceola.com. And right now, enter the code FSU20 and get 20% off your annual subscription. That's FSU20.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Osceola's Seminole Sidelines podcast. My name is Patrick Burnham. I'm a football writer for the Osceola and the host of Seminole Sidelines. I am joined today by the Osceola's publisher, Jerry Kutz, the Osceola's managing editor, Bob Ferrante, and Osceola football analyst and former FSU offensive lineman, Mark Salva. All right, guys, we are taping this on Wednesday post-Pittsburgh, and it has been a busy day in Tallahassee. Among the storylines is Florida State gets ready to head to NC State for a Saturday night game in Raleigh. Quarterback James Blackman has opted out and will transfer. He will concentrate on going to class and finding another college home the rest of the semester. Wide receiver Tamorrion Terry has opted out. We do not know what his plans are. We would imagine it's to prepare for the NFL draft, but obviously he would have the option of transferring as well. Defensive tackle Marvin Wilson will miss the rest of the season due to an unspecified injury. He had missed the Pitt game. And then probably even more unfortunately, Devontay Love-Taylor was hurt in Pitt game. He will be out the rest of the season and will also but he's anticipated coming back to Florida State next year from what we can gather at this point. And then, of course, some updates on other health-wise issues. You got Jordan Travis, who is day-to-day after leaving the game and at halftime against Pitt, and Chubba, Purdy, and Tate, Rodemaker obviously are the two scholarship quarterbacks that are healthy, and it's yet to be determined who will start. Mike Norvell said in his press conference this morning that Tate was not available for Pitt, and one of the reasons Chubba came in as the fourth quarterback in that game because Wyatt Rector had made an appearance. And then, of course, at safety, Florida State was down 3 safeties last week. Hamza Nasruddin, Renardo Green, and Travis Jay were all back at practice today, all going through team drills. And again, Mike Norvell said that they will take those 3 guys day by day as they get closer to NC State as to whether they will actually suit up and play or not. So a lot to cover, guys. But Mark, I want to start with you on James Blackman's decision not to be a Seminole.
I genuinely feel bad for James. This run we've been on in the last 3 or 4 years, he's been the focus of it. And it's very cliche to say the quarterback gets more credit than he deserves and gets more blame than he deserves. But I think in this case, it's probably warranted. I mean, when he came in, I remember when he came in as a true freshman, you saw a live arm, you saw some possibilities, and as his career kept going, unfortunately he was behind probably some of the worst offensive line play that I've probably ever seen in major college football. And he was a punching bag as a result of that for a long time, taking unbelievable shots. I mean, we all saw it. I mean, he was just getting murdered a lot of times. And so what happens in that case, you get a guy who's probably damaged goods in terms of his eyes always went to the pass rush and never downfield. And then I'm sure that contributed to his accuracy issues, his technique issues, just his overall general confidence. So, but the thing I can compliment James on is the guy, from my perspective anyways, the guy battled every week. I think he gave his all for the program. I really do. And for that, I give him, a kudos and a compliment. But, unfortunately, because of the circumstances around the team, he got a lot of the blame. Some deservedly, but mostly I think undeservedly. He just was put in an impossible situation. And, I just wish him the best. I really do. I generally feel bad for the guy.
Yeah, I agree with you, Mark. He has bought into every coach he's had, every offense he's played in, has given tremendous effort. And obviously his ability to play at the major college level, you could question, but you can't question his leadership. You can't question what kind of teammate he was. And the thing I hate for him and a fan, whether it was the crowd booing Mike Norvell for putting him in, or James because he was going in. For a fan base that likes to talk about being one tribe, I hate it for James Blackman that his last memory as a Seminole will be being booed because he was coming off the field and booed because he threw an interception. Certainly deserved better than that from the fan base, and really hate to see a kid that be his lasting memory of walking off Doak Campbell Stadium's field, Bobby Bowden Field. But anyway, certainly cannot question James's commitment to the program. And obviously, Mike Norvell was very complimentary of James in the day's press conference and had nothing but glowing things to say about him. And I wish James Blackman the best of luck wherever he is in school next year, and whoever he's playing for is getting a high character, high quality guy. Bob or Jerry, you got anything to add on James?
I thought James honestly played his best football at the end of his freshman season. Went down to Florida, picked up a win against the Gators, played right after Jimbo bailed for Texas A&M. They got the win when Randy Sanders was calling the plays. It was run-based offense, but James was managing it very, very well. And I thought he played as a freshman at a very high level with an offense that was structured to his strengths and not Jimbo trying to ram everything into the mind of a true freshman who was thrust in that situation. And honestly, James never really progressed from there. We didn't see him do anything significant. I don't think through multiple coaches, offensive coordinators, it just wasn't clicking. We can all say maybe he wasn't a good fit for Florida State. He's not a Power 5 QB. Who knows? I think somebody's going to grab him out of the transfer portal. Whether he graduates, where he plays next year, it's all up in the air. The guy does bleed garnet and gold, as he's said to us many, many times on the practice field. But I think this is best for him moving forward. This gives him a chance to move on to somewhere, wherever it is, Power 5, Group of 5. He will find a home somewhere in this process.
And the great thing for James is he'll have 2 years, because obviously the eligibility does not count against him this year. Jerry, any final thoughts on James Blackman as a Seminole?
Well, I agree with you guys about, the guy gave it whatever it is that he has, he gave it to the program. And so I want to give him some props. And I also agree, this is not the place for him. And if he can get to the place where he can be successful, then he can end his college career with happy thoughts. And that's the great thing about the portal. I mean, think about all the guys in generations past whose college careers ended and they never had that chance to go somewhere where they could succeed. I mean, that's truly sad. I think the portal allows James to chase, a dream. And the other thing is the portal, look, guys, there's going to be a lot of roster flipping for Florida State to get where it is. And you're going to have a bunch of this. And today we had a little bit of it, but we got a lot more of it to get where we need to go.
Yeah, and we can address the portal as it becomes clear what's going on with who's leaving after the year and all of those great things. But moving on to Tamorrion Terry, wide receiver Tamorrion Terry decided that he did not want to be a part of this football team anymore and let Coach Norvell know, I guess, over the weekend that he was moving on. Bob, what are your thoughts on Terry leaving the program?
As we're recording, I just saw on Twitter that Tamorrion put out a statement. And, I think in part it's worth reading just a little bit of it. He just says, "It breaks my heart that I cannot finish what I started here at Florida State. I came back for a reason. While I fell short of that goal, I hope you know that I gave it my all through personal loss and injury. Ultimately, I didn't think I could help my teammates to the best of my ability the rest of the season. And I decided the best choice was for me to use this time to heal and recover." So if you take those words for what they are, probably very candid, he didn't look 100% on Saturday against Pitt, I don't know how much more he would have gotten better, what levels of percent he would have been able to get better. We've argued, is Tamorrion even the best receiver on this roster? Statistically, yes. Production at times, yes. But I think we have a lot of questions about what he can do on the field besides run a deep fly and race past a defensive back. Also wish him the best, but I think this leaves a gaping hole in a very questionable receiving core that no matter who the quarterback is, no matter who's playing the offensive line, boy, you got to have guys who are going to A, catch the ball and be dependable, and B, do something special after the catch. And we're really still not sure, even with Terry gone, who that's going to be.
Yeah, there's a big question of who's going to step up at wide receiver over the next couple of weeks, next 4 weeks as FSU plays out the season. Maybe Wyatt Rector. He seems to be finding a lot of ways to be used lately. But anyway, listen, just reading the tea leaves on Tamorrion Terry, I think this worked. I think this was where it was headed a long time ago. I think it's best for both parties. I think you could read into a lot of what wasn't said when Mike Norville addressed Terry leaving the program. It was very short. It was I think he actually came back to it, Bob, if I'm not mistaken. He had talked about Blackman and Wilson and Love-Taylor, and even had addressed Hamza, I believe, before he came back to Terry. So, listen, I think unfortunately things like this happen in transition of a program. There has to be a buy-in factor. And again, just reading the tea leaves, I think this was best for Tamorrion Terry and for Florida State's football program, especially probably its head coach, Mike Norvell. But yes, you're right. He was the most dynamic player, talent-wise or potential-wise, they had at wide receiver. But the talent was not meeting its potential, basically. He was inconsistent, and I wish him the best down the road. Hope he gets healthy and starts getting prepared for the NFL draft or his future college home, whichever the two choices he decides. That brings us to Marvin Wilson. Marvin came back for his senior year and obviously had an injury before the Pitt game, unspecified, but has chosen to get healthy, prepare himself for the NFL draft, or he would also have the option of playing somewhere again next year if he wanted to. But Jerry, let's get your thoughts on Marvin Wilson.
Yeah, that was it wasn't surprising that Marvin terminated the season to me. I think he's gotten nicked up during the year, and I haven't seen the effort. He wasn't helping himself by playing, and he wasn't helping his team. And if he's nicked up, the best thing he can do is not play, get healthy, and move on to what I imagine will be the NFL draft this winter. Quite frankly, that whole position group has been a disappointment this year. And Marvin has just been the poster child for that, the disappointment at that position.
Mark, you got anything on Marvin?
Yeah, I think the fact that this, in the press conferences and the inability to go out to practice, we're just left with, what's going on with these guys, especially on the defensive line, because he hasn't looked himself all year. And if it's been nagging injuries, if it's been, maybe conditioning, I don't know, because we've never gotten handed upfront answers on any of it, or the ability to observe practice. So it seems to me that obviously he's got some stuff going on. He's been playing less than optimally for his potential and the baseline he set as a younger player. And, just wish him the best too. Whatever it is, it just perplexes me, the whole defensive line situation, how it's materialized this year. It kind of taken us all by surprise. And he was the front and center of all of that.
Yeah, I agree. Listen, he has not resembled the player he was last year at all, where at times he was dominant in the middle of the defense. Has had one good half against North Carolina as the defense played its best half of the year up until the Pitt game. And we can get into that a little bit later. They actually statistically played their best game of the season against Pitt. Now, they should have, because Pitt was one of the weaker offenses that they faced. The 41 points we can get into a little bit later. But, yeah, I agree. I think there's been something off, whether it was injury or not buying into the new culture. The drama with this started back in the summer and seems to have silently continued. And to Mark's point, Mark, we have to make an evaluation based on what we see on Saturdays. That's all we see. It's not the plan. It was not the plan that Mike Norvell had. He had planned to let the press come to every practice prior to COVID. That has not worked out. And so we're left to draw conclusions based off what we see on Saturday. And what we saw on Saturdays from Marvin Wilson was a guy that was not the same guy that he was prior to this year. So, again, get healthy, prepare for the combine. I think he's got some room to make up in the combine. It's going to be very important because his draft status has certainly not been helped over the course of the first 7 games of Florida State's season. Bob, any thoughts on Marvin?
Yeah, I'm reluctant to criticize Marvin just simply based on not knowing what the injury is, the severity of it. Mike Norvell called it a procedure, not a surgery. I don't know if that's a semantic thing or not. But I do have to wonder, just how much that was bothering him. Is this the result of a 2-5 team? Could he have somehow ground this one out? I say all that yet again, not knowing what the injury is, what the severity is, how much pain he's in, how much he's practicing. But to your point, we see what we see on Saturdays, and the production, besides the 3 blocked, field goal and the extra point, we're not there. The energy was not there. I think, Pat, at times you and I discussed how much is Marvin being double teamed, how much of that is a reason, not an excuse. Is that a reason? And at times I think you said, yeah, he is double teamed. And other times you said not nearly as much as we might think is a storyline here. So it's tough that he leaves on this note, but he's got a long career in the NFL for sure.
Yeah, and he's going to continue to be around the program, and a guy obviously that played a lot of good football prior to this year. And like you said, we don't know the entire story about what went on that led to ultimately this decision. But I do tend to agree with you. If this program's 5-2 instead of 2-5, it's a harder decision. That's just the reality of the situation. We'll move on to Devontay Love-Taylor. Guys, out of the 4 departures or 4 losses today, you could argue, and I don't think either of the 4 of us would have thought this coming into the season, that losing Devontay Love-Taylor hurts this team worse than losing any of the other 3 guys. No disrespect to those guys, all talented in their own right, and all, or in James' case, a great leader. But Devontay Love-Taylor, done for the year, would look to be a knee injury suffered in the first half of the Pitt game. Mark, obviously, you're a guy that pays attention to the offensive line. Talk a little bit about what Devontay Love-Taylor losing him means to this team moving forward.
Yeah, well, first of all, going into the year, my expectations were not overly high. I thought he would struggle in certain areas coming in. I just like to say he totally exceeded my expectations of what I had for him coming into the year. And not only that, my observations, again, from afar, it looked to me, and I wrote this in our midseason evaluation, that his influence went beyond his play. It looked to me, from what I could tell, he looks like a leader on that line. He looks like the guy that kind of, his influence manifested itself through the whole improvement of the offensive line throughout the year. Because to me, it was kind of obvious. He was doing a lot of communicating. You could see him in between snaps, the things he was doing, encouraging guys. I mean, guys looking at him talk. I mean, all that stuff. So losing him, to me, is a big blow, because he's a guy that was a leader on that line, and by consequently a leader on the team, especially for that offense. So that's going to have an impact. There's no doubt. And not only that, going into the second half of the year, for me, having 3 tackles was quite a luxury. One that we haven't had. Heck, we didn't even have one And going in for the second half of the year, having 3 was a tremendous luxury. And I think with Love-Taylor, you had the ability for him to play even guard and move some guys around. He's one of those putty guys I think you could have put in multiple positions. So yeah, this one hurts up front for sure. And with with Darius Washington's injury, just coming back from an injury, we don't know the status and how bad or how tenuous that is. That really puts us in a precarious position. So now we're down to 2 tackles that have played relatively well throughout the year. We're on a razor's edge here up front, as we continue to be and have been for the last 3 or 4 years. And this just kind of adds to it.
Yeah, and I agree with you on a lot of what you said about Devontay Love-Taylor. When they announced that he was transferring, I went back and watched his film, and I thought that you were probably going to get a shorter version of Ryan Roberts from last year. He's turned out to be better than that. And what I think about, you said over and over and over the last 18 months when we talk about offensive line play, is it's about want to and getting by on grit and determination. And Devontay Love-Taylor is not the most physically gifted offensive lineman on Florida State's roster. They've got freshmen that are better athletes, but this guy fights. It means something to him. It was important to him. And to be honest, I think he's surpassed everyone's expectation. Certainly, I think he's outperformed the right tackle from last year, Ryan Roberts. Nothing against Ryan, but Devontay's got a little something about him. We've heard Alex Atkins talk about it several times, and I think it's a lot bigger blow than I had anticipated. If he, coming into the season, and a kid that hope you can get back healthy for spring football next year, if there's spring football, and get him back in this offensive line and get him revved up and going again for next year, because I do think he's a guy that will choose to come back next year. Bob, any thoughts on Devontay?
I welcome him back with open arms. If I'm Alex Atkins, if he wants to come back, he can come on down. Started at 3 different positions this year: right tackle, right guard, left tackle. You can't buy that kind of versatility unless you're in the NFL and you got guys who got to play as many of those 5 as possible. So as far as just consistently being good, he was that, but he communicated, he made the guys around him better. Definitely. If he wants to come back, that's a guy you welcome back.
Yeah, and it's left FSU so thin at offensive line that true freshman Lloyd Willis is on the 2-deep depth chart this week. Is somebody that we have not heard. And I would think they would do some implementing of people in different spots before it got to Lloyd, but he is on the 2-deep. That's where this injury puts the offensive line, and certainly you hate to see it for Devontay, given just the praise he has gotten from Mike Norvell and from Alex Atkins and from his teammates. So hate to see it, but hopefully Devontay will be back next week or next year. Speaking of this week, guys, Florida State's got a question at quarterback. Jordan Travis, according to Mike Norvell, is day-to-day. It did not sound overly optimistic. Not that he was pessimistic, but I think he was, I don't know if it was cloak and dagger, but certainly he did not sound as warm and fuzzy about him coming back as maybe some of the safeties he had talked about later in that press conference. But Jordan Travis is day-to-day. And, of course, that leaves Florida State with 2 other scholarship quarterbacks behind them, Chubba Purdy and Tate Rodemaker. We do know that Chubba played Saturday night against Pitt for a half, 12 of 21 for 38 yards. Tate Rodemaker was not available, according to Mike Norvell, against Pitt. He was dressed, but had been sick all week, and it sounds like he didn't practice. So, Bob, I'm going to throw this back to you. What do you do if you're Florida State if Jordan Travis is not available?
I think we're all curious being the right word here, is Chubba Purdy ready to take on significant reps early in the game when you're still committed to the run? That's the identity of this offense. We have seen Chubba Purdy in the second half of games when Florida State is down medium and down big, and he's had to just come up with something. I'm curious to see what the guy can do. If the staff feels like through practice, that's the guy I want to see in the first quarter or second quarter. I think that's the best answer. We've seen him in a very limited scope through 2 games, not enough to make a judgment. So that's my move if Jordan Travis is not available.
Yeah, and Mark, I want to get your opinion on this, and I see it on message boards. I've seen it on our message board. I've seen it on other websites. There seems to be a consensus that Chubba Purdy is the savior of this program at quarterback, and Tate Rodemaker kind of gets left out of the conversation. It's never, but Tate actually had the pressure of starting a football game for Florida State in a game that it had to win, and he also was more impressive in his debut against Miami than Chubba was against Louisville. I don't think there's a huge amount of difference between the two. I think they're different players. Chubba's a little bit better athlete, a little bit more fluid athlete than Tate, but they both have similar arms. What is the infatuation with Chubba that I'm missing?
I can't necessarily answer that. I think probably his athletic ability, maybe the way he played it as a high school player, maybe projected more for the offense that they envision. And that's probably a lot to do with it. I will say this: any true freshman quarterback that you bring in to a situation needs to have some complementary stuff going on around him. If your season rests on a true freshman quarterback, you're in deep trouble. If an ideal situation would be you have a very strong defense, you got a sound running game, you've got playmakers you can get the ball to in a relatively quick fashion. And we haven't demonstrated any of that this year. I think teams will probably load up on the run, try to confuse them on kind of what happened in Pitt, right? Did a lot of things, confusing things, brought pressure from different angles, different places, confused the offensive line. I mean, look, if those guys are having to sit back there, read a defense, do things that you expect from a more mature quarterback, those guys aren't ready for that yet. Now, we got to really manage how we approach ball games if these guys are going to be in there for either of them.
Yeah. Yeah, and I want to be clear. I think both kids have plenty of potential. But
I
Jerry,
do too.
yeah, I mean, why do you think there's such a clamor for Chubba versus Tate, given the fact that in both their 2 appearances, they've looked relatively the same?
I think it's because you have certain websites that ordained him as the better player and hyped him up, and the fans, bought into that. None of us got to watch either one of them in practice, so
yep. I
think it's irresponsible for journalists to hype somebody that they haven't seen.
Yeah.
I don't think it's fair to the kid. I don't think it's fair to the coach. And at any rate, I mean, the little bit I've seen, I think Rodemaker's got as good a chance of being an impact player down the road.
I agree. And you know what? You never know until you're facing live bullets, for lack of a better term. Right. And how each kid reacts and how they handle that situation is it speaks volumes. And I think they both have equally handled it pretty much the same way. I mean, I think to your point, Pat, Tate was under a tremendous amount of pressure going in that Jacksonville State game, having to win the game and start the game. But, look, neither one of those guys are ready to lead the charge, so to speak, and be the guy out front. We got to protect them, or else we may get into another Blackman situation where you get the guy and you get him, you start harming a guy and they start getting pounded and they start losing confidence. I mean, I think that Mike would be a little more attuned to that and hopefully would protect them. I would expect that, but that's a must in my book.
Yeah, well, and given all that, I do think if Jordan Travis is not able to play, I think Chubba's a starter because he's the most like Jordan athletically. But I want to ask each of the 3 of you this. If Jordan Travis is not available on Saturday, do you have a concerted plan where you're going to go in and we're going to play both these freshmen? Bob, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I'm pro Kentucky Derby offense. I think you want to play one of the 2 freshmen for sure.
But do you play both of them if Jordan's not available?
Sure, why not? You're 2-5. You got to figure out which of these guys is the answer, right?
That's right. That's right. Jerry, do you play both quarterbacks if Jordan's not available?
Yeah, I thought of it. I haven't thought of it in those terms, but I do think, look, I don't think as good an athlete as Tate Rodemaker may be, he does not run like Jordan Travis. Okay.
You talking about Chubba or Tate?
Chubba.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Chubba. Chubba does not, you're not going to be able to put in the Travis Jordan offense and Chubba run it like Jordan runs it. Jordan's special.
Yeah, he's not going 88.
No.
I mean, from what I've seen of Chubba, he's going to get run down. He don't have those quicks. And that's, I'm making a really quick evaluation on the kid. But I don't think you can run that offense with a high degree of probability of success. So I do think the offense you can run, Rodemaker's is capable of doing it as Chubba is.
Yeah, and they've used most of Mike's quarterbacks at Memphis had skill sets similar to Tate's more so than Chubba's, although I think we'll all agree there's something fascinating, even if you watch pro football this past weekend, about guys that can do it both. I watched Kyler Murray and Tua go against each other, and that was a fun game to watch. Not that Chubba is either one of those two guys. But,
look, here's the thing. You go into this week and prepare like you're not going to have Jordan.
Yes, I agree.
You make it real competitive for both those guys, and you say whoever does the best this week, you start the game. And you go with that starter with the correct game plan, and you at that point you ride the hot hand. You start them out. If the guy's being productive, whoever it is, if they're being real productive and the ball's moving, and you liking what you see, like the way he's handling it, like the way he's leading, stay with it. If it's really struggling, go with the next guy.
Yep.
And then see if he can do it. And if he gets hot, then that's good. And after that, you just got to go with what you got.
Hey, I'd like to add something else to that, if you don't mind. If you're trying to protect your quarterback and his psyche, having two guys greased up is not a bad plan, because if things get hairy and it's a jailbreak, and your quarterback's being harassed, it's not a bad thing to pull him over to the sidelines and let him watch the other guy take a pounding and coach him up a little bit. I think a rotation of quarterbacks, they may start to see some things from the sideline with their coach that they're not able to see when the bullets are being shot at them.
Yeah.
And I think you can kind of protect them and coach them and encourage them all at the same time by playing too.
Well, and I do think there's some reasons to be positive about the offense moving into the NC State game, and I'll get into that a little bit later. But I do want to move to another position group, and that's the safeties, where you were out Renardo Green and Travis Jay against Pitt, where they were playing three quarterbacks. They did participate in practice today. They did participate in team drills, so they are getting at least some contact work. Now, whether it's full contact tackle or thud or whiz, we're not sure. And then Hamza Nasruddin got the heaviest workload of his year this week. Bob, what are your thoughts on the safeties? And listen, I don't think we're going to see Hamza. That's been my opinion all year. I do think it's a good sign for Florida State that Renardo Green and Travis Jay are practicing, because they've been two of their most productive players.
Yeah, the Hamza thing is tough to gauge, because, look, he's been on Florida State's release depth chart since the Miami game. He hasn't played yet. For some reason, he's stayed on the depth chart, even though he's, for some reason, not close so far. Look, there's an argument for why Hamza should not play. He's got the film. He's ready for the NFL. I get all that. I think there's an argument that Florida State desperately needs him back there. I mean, he would make a significant difference right now. If it doesn't develop, I think you got to lean on Travis Jay, getting him back, getting Renardo Green back, getting safeties who can make impactful plays in the secondary to limit these chunk plays. The chunk plays have just been miserable, for this program, not just this year, but for years. You got to have good safety play just to clean up the mess that frankly gets through. They're your last line of defense, quite literally on a lot of these plays. So whoever can be healthy enough to go and can go, I think they need it. I think what we saw, and I know we're going to talk about NC State later, but what I saw Friday night is Bailey Hockman has improved, and that's an offense that's going to put the ball in the air, and they've got some playmakers, and that's going to test Florida State secondary just like everybody else has. So you got to have your full complement of whoever's available when you go into that battle Saturday night.
Yeah, I mean, you got a situation last Saturday against Pitt where you're playing Sidney Williams, who he played sparingly at best. He's a true freshman, and at safety, and actually he's a corner, I believe. But anyway, they played 3 corners because they didn't have enough safeties. And you're right, they're going to need some help back in the secondary. You go back and watch that NC State Miami film, and NC State was taking the top off man coverage against Miami, and that's saying a lot. But I do want to go back to the stay and leave situation, because a lot of people are going to read that there's a lack of buy-in to Mike Norvell's program and culture from the upperclassmen. But, you look at a guy for every James Blackman, Tamorrion Terry, you got a guy like Emmett Rice and Leonard Warner. We've seen Emmett Rice continue to get better and better each week as a senior. And then you've seen a guy like Leonard Warner, who has now played 4 different positions in his last 18 games as a Seminole, and has moved from middle linebacker to Fox. He was outside linebacker last year, went to middle linebacker, started middle linebacker this year, now went to defensive end. So, Mark, you've been through it. This wasn't a total negative day for Florida State's football program. I mean, you've got a guy like Emmett Rice and a guy like Leonard Warner, and even James Blackman had been bought into Mike Norvell and his system up until this weekend. And then, of course, you've got a guy like Bavion Johnson, a senior, who, he struggled on the field, but you can't question his commitment to the program and buying into what Mike Norvell's doing. Just kind of talk about, the yin and yang of that. You've been through it as a coach.
Yeah. So, as when new staff comes in, first thing you're doing is you're looking for those guys that you can depend on. Who are guys that you can depend on, that you can lean on, and more importantly, will bring others with them. And I think that's the thing that we struggle with at FSU is I think some of the guys that have influence are not necessarily the most bought in for whatever reason. And really the thing that is the most influential is production. If you get a guy who's productive and who has buy-in and who is showing improvement, that's going to start to exert more influence around those that are, either way. I mean, you always hear that thing about, 10% of the people are elite, 10% are not very good. And the rest are going to follow one or the other. They're going to fall somewhere in the middle. And the idea is to get people to follow that 10% that are elite and performing. That's where we need to get to. I think when you look at Emmett Rice and you look at the guys that are improving, those guys are moving towards the positive side, and I think you got some that maybe move towards the negative side. So it's kind of depends on the individual. As a coach, you got to try to create an environment where they are being rewarded, obviously, for that exceptional attitude and play. But you know what? When those others in the middle see the improvement and see the positive outcome, that has the most influence.
Okay. Well, I do want to move on to actual football on the field. And obviously we're several days removed from the Pitt game, but the FSU fell to 2-5, 41-17 loss against Pitt. Would like just to get a general impression of what you took from the Pitt game and what you thought the keys of the game were. And Bob, I'll start with you.
From the Pitt game, that was a tough watch. I think everybody except for Alex Mastromano had a kind of a rough night. I know we're seeing growth from guys like Emmett Rice. I appreciate you noting that and mentioning it. It's not all the guys that play, but it's just the way the performance looks, I think, at the end of the day. I wish the 4th down calls from the Pitt game had, either been a punt or better play call, better execution, whatever you want to say it. I really question Norvell's calls. I thought it was too much rolling of the dice, too much putting the defense in a bad spot. The short field, the quick change, it was tough for that defense just to do anything. I thought it put them in a really bad spot. Is it a learning lesson for Coach Norvell? Is it a learning lesson for the staff? Do you think about that in the back of your mind moving forward? I hope that answer is yes. And, but, Norvell felt like he had to roll the dice, and it just didn't pay off. It didn't pay off at all.
Yeah, listen, it's easy to criticize that last one because they didn't make it and got converted into a touchdown. They dodged a bullet on the previous 4th and 2 play when they didn't make it, and Pitt missed a field goal. So, but 24 of actually 31 of their points came off either short fields or turnovers, if you include the pick 6 thrown by Chubba. But 24 points came off 4 possessions where they only had to total 125 yards of offense. And I agree. Listen, Mike has been aggressive all year in 4th down situations. I think 16 times they've gone for it this year. Obviously, he's been very aggressive with timeouts towards the end of the half. But in that last circumstances, those previous 2 times, Florida State had a lead to play with. They weren't going to give up a lead if they didn't make it and Pitt scored. The last 4th down where they took over on FSU's 47, you were down 17-14. Pitt does not have the most dynamic offense in the world. They're very efficient when Pickett's in the game, but I think I would have chosen, and again, revisionist history, hindsight's 2020, all those cliches, but I think that one to me was the turning point in the game, and it was magnified at the start of the second half by the interception where they took over at the 20 and scored again. And at that point, Pitt's defense had already shut down FSU's offense. They shut it down actually after the first quarter. But you have to give FSU props in the first quarter. They found a way to get 14 points on the board, and they rushed for 137 yards, which is the most anyone had rushed against Pitt for in a half for sure, and I believe entire ball game. So, the defense played a little bit better than in reviewing the game, played a little bit better than I thought they did. But obviously the offense was totally enabled by the second quarter by Pitt's defense, and Pitt's defense had done that even against number 2 ranked Notre Dame. You go back and look at the score, and Notre Dame had 4 short field touchdowns and a block punt for a touchdown. So anyway, same recipe that worked for Notre Dame against Pitt worked for Pitt against Florida State. Mark, your thoughts on the Pitt game quickly?
Yeah, just real quick. I mean, my impression was the first time I felt that we weren't as prepared as we needed to be, and I kind of didn't necessarily agree with maybe the approach we took or maybe the game plan, because when Pitt did adjust, we came out and we had some success, and Pitt made some adjustments, identified a couple weaknesses, and took advantage of it. We did not adjust back. And I think that for the first time, I was like, okay, it's not feeling good right now. And to your point, Pat, about the last 4th down, I don't know what kind of analytics they're using or what that is, but it just didn't feel right. They had some momentum, they had caught up. We were in a bad spot, and to go for it on 4th down there and then run the play we did run, it just didn't feel right to go for it for me, regardless of what the analytics say. But not getting it just magnified the problems, right? So
yeah, you were averaging negative yards rushing for that particular quarter,
right?
And I think it was 0.5.
Exactly. So if you make it, what are the chances you're going to get a score out of it? It just, at that point, I would have liked to punted, play defense, maybe, and hopefully get in halftime and try to adjust what they adjusted on. So
yeah, and I agree with you. You can't, listen, I know analytics are a bigger part of football than they ever have been before. Hell, they're a bigger part of every damn sport than they've ever been before. But sometimes as a coach, you got to go by what's actually happening on the field, and like you said, a feel for the game. And I just felt like that was a missed opportunity. And again, revisionist history. I get to the luxury of sitting in the game in a press box, not having to worry about. And listen, I like the aggressive nature. Listen, I just didn't like it in that instance. But in life, sometimes you've got to take chances to get where you want to go and do some unconventional things. And you got to do the same thing on a football field. I just didn't agree with that one. It's made easier by the fact that they didn't make it. So, although I wish they would have. But Jerry, quickly, your thoughts on the Pitt game. Then we'll get into NC State.
Well, everything you guys said, I concur with. I didn't like the third down play calls. I didn't think we adjusted well to whatever it was that they were doing defensively. But the one thing you guys left out that I think you might agree with me, part of their problems, I think, in adjusting to what Pitt was doing was the loss of Love-Taylor. And my understanding is he's making a lot of their check calls. And we were an appreciably different team when he went out. And I don't want to put it all on that, but we had a freshman quarterback at that point. We lost a significant and maybe the play caller on the offensive line. And then we lost the play caller behind center. And we were a dead duck at that point.
Yeah, and then you add to that Pitt's defense is for real. I mean, they've done it against everybody. I'll go back to that. I mean, once they found out what Florida State was trying to do, they, like Mark said, they shut it down. And you had two of the best defensive ends in the country coming off the edge. They couldn't protect the passer. Listen, they played a very, very good defense. You could not cannot take anything away from Pitt in that regard.
The thing with this team that I think is just so frustrating is the margins are so small for us. We don't have a lot of room for error on both sides of the ball. And if for us to win a game, it just all has to come together. And the inability to do that consistently is just so frustrating. And we just don't have it. We just don't have the personnel, don't have the culture yet the way it needs to be. So we got to play perfect. And when you're right, Jerry, when things went south, especially with those two guys, there went our margins, and we're done.
Well, the margin does not get any easier on this Saturday night, as FSU heads to Raleigh, one of FSU's favorite places to play, to take on what is arguably one of the better, most improved teams in the ACC compared to last year. NC State was 4-8 under Dave Duran in his seventh year last season. They're 4-3 this year, and they played Miami toe for toe last week in a 44-41 loss to Miami. That really they just the last team that had the ball was probably going to win. But both teams moved the ball up and down the field. Listen, guys, it's despite the fact that they're 4-3, they have not been great on defense. They're 104th total defense, 106th pass defense, rushing defense 80th. So we know Florida State's going to try to run the ball, particularly if it's got two freshmen. So at quarterback and are only two quarterbacks available, and their scoring defense is 89th. Now their offense is what worries me. They are 41st in scoring offense, 32.9. But listen, they don't run the ball effectively, even though what we saw on Friday night against Miami was a much improved offensive line. Passing offense, they're much better. Hockman's got a 61% completion ratio in his starts, and they are 38th in passing offense in the nation at 263. So who wants to start on NC State? Thoughts going into the game?
I hate that stadium. They got it's the most obnoxious fans in the world. I mean, that's saying something when you play at Miami and at Gainesville, but
that is saying something.
I've seen fights in that stadium like I've never seen anywhere else.
Well, the good news, it's going to be socially distant. So
exactly.
the stadiums, the fight should not be, they should be more shouting matches than fisticuffs. But, Jerry, did you have a chance to watch NC State on Friday night?
I did watch a little bit of it. And they do put up a bunch of points. And some of those points came in very unusual ways. I think, what wasn't there, 100-yard kickoff return? And
yes.
And there was some non-offensive opportunities, but they look pretty good on offense. I'm curious. Now they won't have fans in the stands, right?
They'll be, I think they're socially distanced, about 25% capacity.
Okay, because they're in North Carolina, and I don't think North Carolina is allowing fans in their stands. But
yeah, I don't know that for a fact.
It's a weird atmosphere. Let's put it that way. But yeah, I think they're good enough offensively to give our defense all we can handle for sure.
Yeah, and they don't listen, Bob. We watched them from the press box last year, and they were afraid to throw the ball against Florida State. That passing game has come a long way in a year. They've got two really good running backs in Ricky Pearson and Zonovan Bam Knight. Both have been exceptional this year. Both of them have almost 500 yards individually. So talk a little bit about what you saw on Friday night.
Yeah, it's interesting. Reflecting back on a year ago, I thought, well, Bailey Hawkman is getting his butt kicked and he has no supporting cast. And then watching them a little bit this year, especially that Miami game, it felt like there were playmakers around him all of a sudden, and that offense was really clicking. I like the tight end, Angeline. I think he has 6 touchdowns. The running game, Knight's averaging 5.5 person, 4.9 a carry. It seems like maybe when they do run it, they're going to extend the chains, even though it's not a big-time powerhouse run game. Bottom line is NC State does give up a ton of points. It's 35 points a game. The bad news is, do you want to get into a shootout with anybody if you're Florida State? And I fear this one goes shootout and you're potentially on the wrong end of it. So, yes, can Florida State score points? Yeah, I think so. Is NC State going to score a lot of points? Yeah, that's the trouble as you get into that third and fourth quarter, and you hope Florida State's not behind, because this is not the rally offense. This is the, kind of maintain and keep up on the scoreboard and hopefully pull in front and stay in front kind of offense.
Hey, Mark, NC State has struggled on defense this year. They're statistically about the same as Florida State towards the back half of the about every statistical category there is for defense. Their base defense is a 3-3-5 defense. If you run the ball like Florida State does, is that a defense you want to see?
Well, it is with the mature offensive line. The benefit of a 3-5-3 is you can have multiple variations of fronts and blitzes and all kinds of different pressures. And, having a mature offensive line really helps in terms of, declaring, blocking schemes and protection schemes and all that kind of thing. Well, if you had it up, you get a good chance. But it's funny, you were talking all those statistics about NC State's defense, and I was thinking to myself, their guys are probably having a podcast giving statistics about our offense. They're going, we have a chance. And so, I mean, it's I guess may the best team win, obviously. I know one thing about NC State. They're always just – what's that?
I said the least bad team win.
Yeah. The thing about NC State always used to drive me crazy. They're such a salty bunch. And with Dave Dorn, they're even more salty than they usually are. And they're that team. You always want to just get in a fight. And I hope we respond in kind. They hit you a little bit late. They kind of do a little of this and a little of that in between plays and right before the whistle and all that kind of stuff. And they complain about everything. And they're that team. I would want to just get in a fist fight with, and I hope we do. I hope we just get out there and just try to respond in kind and make this a ball game, because that's the only chance we got. Yeah. Listen,
I think it's going to be an interesting ball game, but as we've seen every week during college football, something crazy is bound to happen. Florida State just needs something crazy to happen in its favor. If you're looking at common opponents, NC State beat Pitt 28-24, lost to North Carolina 48-21, and Miami 44-41. I tell you what, if I'm playing Miami, I am not lining up in a 3-5-3 look. They did that against Miami the same way Florida State did, and Miami just went up and down the field. But anyway, they got a new offensive coordinator at NC State, Tim Beck, who was Tom Herman's offensive coordinator at Texas last year. They are playing a lot of tempo, particularly like Kendall did after you get a first down. They're going to use some motion. Offensive line looks better. Their receivers look very good in beating man coverage against Florida State or against Miami. So I think it's got a chance to be a high-scoring game. But you know what we're probably going to get is a low-scoring game because we're thinking high-scoring. And it could be raining up there. Who knows with this daggum storm that's going. But anyway, big game for Florida State. They need it to avoid a guaranteed losing record in the regular season, which may not matter as it pertains to bowls. And I do want to talk about Florida State and bowls next week, not this week. I think that we need to start talking about that because obviously brand names are going to get looked at regardless of their record this year. And Florida State could probably benefit from having some extra practices to make up for the lack of spring and help Mike Norvell continue building his program and building the culture of this program. But we'll get into that a little bit next week. But certainly a big game for Florida State. And, we'll see what happens on Saturday night in Raleigh. Anybody, you want to make predictions or you want to save that till Saturday morning when we put out keys and predictions?
Well,
everybody need a little bit more time to study.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, what I wanted to bring up is, we have some position changes now. The roster has changed, and for us against NC State, what do you guys think we're going to do with our defensive line? What will be the combinations we'll see there and at receiver? Because we've been impacted. And then Mark and Pat on the offensive line without Love-Taylor out. What needs to happen there or is likely to happen?
Well, I know on the offensive line wise, you got to say, okay, who's your next best guy to go in? Is it Baselli? If it is, do you take, the center and move him, let him play guard like he did last year? Is it who's the next best guy? And that's where you go offensive line wise. I mean, if we had 6 or 7, now we're down to 6. That's what you do there. Defensive line wise, I think didn't I read that we got one guy now eligible, right? From
you got
Jared Jackson eligible from Louisville. So who knows if he's been working? Who knows what kind of shape he's in? Who knows what kind of player he is? But at least it's a body, I think Briggs, I like Briggs. He looks the part physically. I think as he gets more time, he could be more effective. It's not like Cooper's still around, right? So maybe it's just probably more of the same up front. I mean, I don't know that we'll be any better, but maybe we won't be any worse.
Yeah,
I don't know.
On the defensive line, Briggs is listed first, but as an or with Fabian Lovett in Marvin's spot. So obviously Dennis Briggs has shown considerable growth in the 3 or 4 weeks he's been back with the team to be the starter. And obviously, listen, I think he's going to be a fantastic football player. I don't know that he's going to be an NFL guy, but he's certainly going to be a very good college football player based on his athletic ability. Robert Cooper is back at the starting nose tackle spot over Corey Durden. There is no or. Corey got the start against Pitt, and Robert outperformed him. And then, of course, you've got Janarius and Joshua at the 2 end positions. Warner played decent according to Adam Fuller. And then, of course, I didn't see a lot from McClendon in the game. But, so I think you're pretty much status quo up front on the front four. And then on the offensive line, I think it's, Darius Washington needs as many reps as he gets. So I think he goes in at one of the tackle spots because of Devontay Love-Taylor's injury. And, you got both your guards back and Maurice Smith at center. So I don't think they're going to have to do a lot of shuffling. depending on what happens in practice. But
right. I was talking about if somebody got hurt.
Oh yeah,
Who's your next guy?
If
right?
somebody gets hurt, you got to think that based on how they've talked, you've got to think that Thomas Schrader's going in. You got to think that he's going in somewhere. Now, obviously, Mark, it depends on who gets hurt, right? So, but I think that it's obviously. I think your next two are going to be either Schrader Baselli or Schrader Scott. But yeah, I think.
Well, I mean,
Schrader,
so like if Summers is your next is a guy that can play guard for sure or tackle, is it better to put in Baselli, who's serviceable, knows what to do, probably has a little more experience than a true freshman, and take Summers and put him?
You're talking about Smith.
I'm sorry, Smith, and put him at guard, or maybe even have the ability to play tackle, or maybe I don't. There's a number of different ways you can do that, but that's kind of got to be the mindset. Do you weaken two to fill one, by taking your starting center out and putting him somewhere else and putting some, or do you just put who the backup is? Is it better?
That's a difficult. You got to hope that they stay healthy during the game.
It's not a fun place to be. I've been there. No. Trust me.
No, I mean, you've got Schrader listed at the backup at left guard and at right tackle. You've got Brady listed as the backup at right guard, Brady Scott at right guard and right tackle. So, and then you got Lloyd Willis listed as the backup at left tackle, who's a true freshman. Now, I think if Darius Washington doesn't play, I think that's when you get some shuffling going on for sure. Yeah. I don't think you put Lloyd Willis in. No. I think you would probably go with some, maybe like you're right, you just kick Smith out, move one of the other guys, whether it's Lucas out to right or left to right guard. I don't know if or left to right tackle. I don't know if he can play it or not. But yeah, that's going to be hard if that comes up for sure.
It's not a fun place to be, buddy. Let me tell you.
No.
When you're moving guys around like that, especially up front. So
yeah. Well, I did want to mention this. It happened a week and a half ago now, but a guy that I have kind of followed just because I'm a San Diego Chargers fan, but Gabe Neighbors, who was the backup tight end for Florida State last year, scored his first NFL touchdown. So I want to congratulate Gabe Neighbors. That was fun to watch. He's on the Chargers as a fullback, H-back tight end, and a guy that I don't know that any of us saw scoring a touchdown in the NFL last year based off what little he played last year for Willie Taggart, but certainly got to be proud for that kid. And then, of course, Dalvin Cook is tearing up the NFL right now. He's had
– that guy covered up a lot of warts, didn't he?
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. So a lot of good things happening for the Seminoles and the pros. And but wanted to just mention Gabe because certainly was proud for him and
good for Gabe.
As a free agent to go out there and make that football team. And then obviously start and get to play with one of the true up-and-coming superstars at quarterback in the NFL. Was fun to watch the other day. But, guys, I appreciate you joining me. It's always fun to talk Florida State football, and we'll be back here next week. And, hopefully Florida State got better by addition by subtraction today.
This has been another edition of the Osceola's Seminole Sidelines. To subscribe to the Osceola, go to theosceola.com. And right now, enter the code FSU20 and get 20% off your annual subscription. That's FSU20. Go Noles!